Okay, Webcomics 101, creating your story. Welcome, everyone. It is time. Let's get into it. So, quick introduction before we get started. What is this? This is Webcomics 101, everything you need to know about starting and creating your own comic series online. I used to do this as a panel at anime conventions, but right now there's not really any anime conventions. And I keep getting questions on TikTok and other social media like, how do I do stuff? How do I do webcomic things? And I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna go and do my whole comics panel, just record it on Twitch, and then it will be archived forever until the internet explodes. Anyway, so now I'm doing it on Twitch. Yay! All right, and lastly, what is a webcomic? I feel like everyone here knows this, but just in case, a webcomic is a comic that you can read online. Shock and awe. Okay, and who the heck are you? That's me. Hello, my name is Star. I am at TheStarfishface on pretty much all platforms. I am the writer, artist, creator, person behind a comic called Cast Off. I have been making comics and posting online since about 2007, and I have learned a lot since then. So now my goal is to pass that knowledge along to the gratuitous amount of people who are currently watching this and anyone who might be watching this on YouTube in the future. Anyway, and now it is time for my shameless self-plug. If you are here and you don't already read my comic, might I suggest maybe doing that? So on the left there is my comic. That is Cast Off, castoff-comic.com. It is also available on Webtoons and Tapas. I'm going to drop a link in the chat real fast. Yay! So there's the whole synopsis and stuff. And then on the right is Spider Forest, the webcomic collective that I am a member of. I will be mentioning them and some of the members throughout this panel. So yeah, check them out. I've been with them almost as long as I've been making Cast Off, and they're great, and there's a lot of really good comics involved, so you should read mine, and then you should go and look through all the Spider Forest comics, because they're good. Anyway, moving on. So, this panel should take probably about 2-ish hours, and I'll be taking a break in the middle, just so I can, like, get up and stretch a little bit. So like I said, please save questions until the designated Q&A time, because I will not be checking chat very much during the presentation. But thank you for being here. Thank you for allowing me to be your teacher for the day. I'm going to teach you guys about comics. Let's get into it. So, part 1, the decision, or why should you make a webcomic? The question that everyone has. Well, I'll tell you why. Here's a bunch of different reasons why you should make a webcomic. Practice. Webcomics are a great way to practice writing, drawing, visual storytelling, self-promotion, and all the other stuff that comes along with it. Discipline. Nothing builds discipline like having readers who depend on you to update your comic regularly. You might be like laying in bed and thinking, I don't want to draw comics today, but you know that you have a handful of people who really want to know what happens next in your story. That can be the kick in the pants you need to get off your butt and go draw comic pages. I know that's what works for me. Portfolio. If you are an artist or a writer or any sort of creative, having a large volume of work is awesome, especially if it lets you see a progression of your skills over time. I'll give you guys an example. I started Cast Off, my current comic, in 2015. That was 6 years ago, and if you look at the pages from the start of the comic, they look extremely different than the pages that are currently being posted on the comic. And that is only because I can attribute 99% of my stylistic and artistic growth to posting and drawing 2 pages a week of comics for like the entire past 6 years, give or take a few months for like hiatuses and stuff. So the best way to get good at something is to do it and do it a lot. So webcomics are fantastic for that. Personal satisfaction. You get to make a thing and then share it with the whole world and make strangers cry over your OCs. That's awesome. We love that. We love making people on the internet cry. Did I say we? I mean me. And also it's fun. Genuinely, really, it is very fun. If it wasn't fun, wouldn't be doing it. Moving along. This is the part where I crush your dreams for a few minutes before building you back up. These are some reasons why you should not make a webcomic, i.e., if you are looking into starting a webcomic for these reasons, I would urge you to reconsider because I don't think it's going to work out for you. So, do not make a webcomic in order to get famous, because that is kind of backwards. Usually, you start a webcomic because you want to start a webcomic. If you start a webcomic specifically to get famous, it's probably not going to work out for you, unfortunately. It'll take a few years at least to build up any sort of fan base. You will not get famous right away, or maybe ever. I will stick in a thing here that says if a comic gets really, really popular really, really quickly, the creator probably already had an audience elsewhere. Audiences do not grow out of thin air, and expecting your comic to be the thing that rockets you to stardom is kind of a fool's errand. So don't fall into that trap. Also, to make money, because I'm sorry, but most comics don't. I've been at this for years, and I'm very, very lucky that I have an audience who is able to support me enough that I can pay rent with my comic. And it has taken me 15 years of marketing myself and drawing and being an artist on the internet in order to, garner an audience that size. So, there you go. Most people make webcomics as a hobby, not as a way to pay the bills. When starting out, your goal should be fun, not profit. Also, if you start it with the goal of profit in mind and then you don't make any money, you're probably just not going to do it anymore. And then that's one more dead comic in the ocean, and that's sad. That makes me sad. Okay, so, should you make a webcomic? Yes! I put it in big font because it's important. It can be hard and stressful, but the satisfaction you'll get from creating something awesome overcomes all the bad parts. It's a great way to make friends, improve your art and writing, and learn lots of cool stuff. Comics are great! Webcomics specifically are great. Anyway, so we're moving right along. Here's a list of excuses that I hear all the time. Y'all, I posted a kind of a gentle, encouraging call-out video on TikTok yesterday, being like, hey, why haven't you started your webcomic yet? And I got literally every single one of these excuses. Every single one. So now I'm going to tell y'all why they're silly. But my art isn't good enough yet. You will get better while you work on the comic. Because you get better at comics by making comics. Spoiler alert. You don't get better at comics about hoarding Pinterest tutorials and thinking about it really hard. If you want to get better at comics, you have to make comics. Okay? Improvement over time is normal and expected, and you should learn by doing the thing. Is too much effort. Everything takes effort. Comics are no exception. That's all I got for that. But I don't have any motivation. This is one I hear so much. Screw motivation. Motivation is a fickle muse, and if you sit around staring at the ceiling waiting for a magical motivation fairy to descend from the heavens and be like, hello, I have motivation for you. If you wait for that, it's never gonna happen. I'm sorry, but it's not. You need discipline. You need to learn how to get yourself up off your butt to go work on comics. That's true of anything. You can't just wait for the magical motivation angel to descend from the heavens. You gotta learn how to be disciplined and learn how to do things for yourself. That's true of everything in life, but it's especially true for comics. But the story isn't perfect yet, and honestly, it won't be. Ever. Perfection is a myth, and chasing it is a fool's errand. You should strive to make something that you think is fun, not something that the world will think is perfect. Okay? Okay? Cool. But I don't have time, which is a fair excuse, but you should make a comic anyway. I made Cast-Off on top of doing a full-time job for the first 4 years of the comic. And now it is part of my full-time job, so there you go. So you should make a comic anyway. Wink. Here's motivational Shia LaBeouf telling you to just do it. Can you guys tell? approximately what time in the human timeline that I made this PowerPoint originally. Motivational Shia LaBeouf gets to stay in this PowerPoint until I stop doing it. Look into his eyes. He wants you to make your webcomic. Anyway, so now that I have thoroughly motivated you, it is time to get started. Or, I want to make a webcomic, but I don't know where to start. Help! But first I'm going to take a drink real fast. Because talking so long is bad for my throat. Let's keep going. So, first, you want to think about what your comic to be. I am your magical motivation fairy. It's me. But I'm the magical motivation fairy kicking you out of bed and telling you to learn self-discipline for your comics. Okay, so first you gotta write your story. So there's a lot of different styles of comics. First you gotta think what you want your webcomic to be. Like, what's the vibe? What's the structure here? Are you doing a gag-a-day comic strip? Are you doing a page-by-page long format comic? Which is what Cast-Off is. A gag-a-day comic strip is like Garfield or Calvin and Hobbes. Page-by-page long format comic is like comic. Comic is like graphic novels, manga, stuff of that nature. An infinite scroll comic, aka webtoon style, where you just like, they're mostly for reading on your phone and you just scroll for days. Or something else entirely, because webcomics are cool because you can get really creative with them. So how you present your comic will impact how you write it, how often you can upload new pages, etc. So it's a very good idea to know this early on. Before you draw your comic, I always recommend writing your comic. Always start with a script or at least an outline. This is less important if you are doing just like a gag-a-day comic strip where there's no like overarching plot, but if there is any plot at all, I would recommend at least starting with some kind of outline. Also, I got a lot of comments on like TikTok videos saying, I don't know how to script, but the cool thing is, unless you're collaborating with someone else, your scripts only need to make sense to you. So you don't have to force yourself to use a format you don't like, okay? Because here's the cool thing. If you're doing a webcomic, you're working for yourself. No editor is probably ever going to see your scripts. So as long as they make sense to you, then it's fine and it works. So don't force yourself to use a format you don't like. I will actually show you guys a snip. I think it's the next slide. Yeah. So this is what my outlines look like. I do these first just to kind of like get the ideas on the page. And so these are from chapter 7 and chapter 8 of my webcomic. Just the very, very basic bare bones of what's going to happen in each chapter. And then from there, I go to scripting it. These are what my scripts look like, and this is the page that goes with it. So you will notice that like some of the stuff changes a little bit from the script to the actual comic page, just depending on how much room I have, because things are different when you're scripting it and just looking at text on the page, or my train of thought just completely derailed. But yeah, so I like break it down. I do it by character, so depending on who's talking. And I also do like stage directions in parentheses. This is how I do my scripts, but you can do your script any way you want. Just pick something you're comfortable with. And if you are feeling stuck, try an outline instead. So this format down here at the bottom is lifted from Pixar's Rules of Storytelling, which if you just Google that, you can find like the full article, but this one is one of my favorites. It's basically how you can structure a plot for anything. So you draw out, you figure out where the cast starts, or even just like where your main character starts, like what is their life like? But then something happens, and because of that, another thing happens, and because of that, another thing happens, and because of that, another thing happens, and then eventually you get to your climax, and then your conclusion where you wrap it all up at the end. So that is what my outlines in general look like. There you go. We already looked at these. So, writing your webcomic. Some more tips. Don't start at the beginning. If you are stuck on your comic's opener and you have like some fun ideas for later scenes, write those first and work your way around them. That's what I do. Like, I was taking a walk the other day and I got an idea for like a cool scene between two of my characters who haven't been introduced yet. And I'm like, oh shit, that's awesome. I gotta write that down. Like, typed it in my phone. But seriously, like, just, especially like before you even start the comic, just kind of like write what you're feeling. You know, if you feel like scripting this scene that's like near the end, do that. Like, you'll eventually have to go and figure out your beginning. But honestly, it's easier to figure out your beginning if you know where you're going. If you figure out the ending, then you can figure out your start, and so on and so forth. If you are having trouble with plot holes, this is something that I do. Write down the problem and actively take notes as you work your way through it. Problems are easier to fix if you see them. This is something that I definitely do. Like, I open up just like a blank Word document and I type in big letters at the top what the problem is. And then I like brainstorm just on the page as I kind of like work my way through it. And I fixed a lot of stuff about Castoff just by doing that. Also, don't stare at an empty Word document and expect inspiration. If you are stuck, go outside, take a walk, and brainstorm. Get the blood flowing and the ideas will follow. Staring at a blank Word document is like the worst way to write. I always write by like taking notes on my phone as I like walk around my apartment complex. And then I go back and stick those notes in a document and write around them. This is calling back to what I just said. Know how your story ends. It is always easier to go somewhere if you know where you're going to end up. And also, foreshadowing is very fun. Write down everything. If you have an idea for a scene or even a single line of dialogue, write it down before you forget. It'll come in handy later, and if you don't write it down, you will forget it, and then you will wake up the next morning and think, oh man, I had an idea for like a really cool line of dialogue, and I don't remember what it was. Ah! And then you just scream forever. I have done that before. It sucks. Write stuff down. Also, programs like Evernote and Google Docs are incredible for scripts because you can access them anywhere. They are good if you get struck with inspiration and you want to write stuff down. It's a very good idea. Highly recommend. Also, read your scripts out loud to check if your dialogue sounds natural. This is especially helpful if you are like kind of stuck on what a character should say. Break into that inner theater kid that I know is in your heart. Pace around your apartment when you're home by yourself and try and figure out the dialogue by actually dialoguing. You know? That's what I do anyway. All right, moving on. Also, this is just for me. Please, 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 I am on my knees begging, do not start with a lore info dump. I beg you, please do not do this to me. If I open up your comic and it is 10 pages of historical trivia talking about, and the gods had a war and it created the universe, I will close out of that tab and I'm not coming back. 'Cause I'm bored. Don't make me start with a pop quiz. Give me a character to root for. There's a concept in writing called a hook, which is how you get your readers interested at the start of a story. Look that up. I don't really go into it in this PowerPoint, but basically, don't do this. You can do it later if it's important. That's fine. But don't make it the very first thing in your comic because it's going to alienate like a majority of your readers, including me. Okay. Some more tips. I have a lot of tips about writing. Sorry. Don't start with your big idea. First comics usually end up abandoned for one reason or the other. I am guilty of this multiple times over. So if it is your first time making a comic at all, if you've never made comics before and you want to jump right in feet first, I would highly recommend starting with something small that you can finish easily. A shorter story is more manageable and you'll learn a lot that can be applied to bigger future projects. I'll give you guys some examples. My very first attempt at a comic, I got tired after 6 pages and I never went back to it. My second attempt at a comic, I knew a little bit more. I knew kind of what I was going into it with. I ran that comic for 3 years, and then I stopped. And I haven't touched it since then. But because I had those two kind of like starter projects, I knew a lot on how to... I had like 3.5 years of comic experience before I went into Cast-Off, and that helped immeasurably when I was starting the comics. So do some, like, figure out just small. Do something short. Get your feet wet before you dive into the deep end. Keep it tight. Sprawling epics are all well and good, but comics take a long time. When you're 500 pages deep into your epic fantasy and you're only an eighth of the way through your outline, you might start seeing the writing on the wall. Shorter is better. Keep it tight. Keep it as short as you possibly can. This is what I highly recommend. Also, planning versus pantsing. Find out which works for you and roll with it rewriting. So you guys may have also heard of this as the architect versus the gardener. This is just kind of like, so planning is like you plot out all your plot events, you know exactly what's going to happen, like when you start writing it. And then pantsing is like, I'm going to do this to the characters and I'm just going to see what happens and roll with it. They are both perfectly valid ways of writing, so you should just experiment and figure out which one works best in your brain. These are some tips. A few years ago when I first made this PowerPoint for the first time, I asked on the Spider Forest forums, what advice would you give to somebody who is starting a webcomic for the very first time? And I'm also in here because I'm in there. I get to be here. It's my own PowerPoint. So write it out first. Always work from a script. Start with something shorter first. Don't just jump into an epic fantasy for your first project. That's from Kez, from What It Takes. Your first comic is a learning experience. Don't try and force it to be something it isn't. And if something isn't work for you, change it because it's your comic. You make the rules. That is from the creator of Leylines. This one's important. A title that no one remembers how to spell or pronounce is a bad title. And let me tell you why. If you're sitting here reading a comic and you try to Google it and you're like, wow, I loved that comic I read over the weekend. I forgot the title, but I wonder if I could just try and Google it. And they can't remember the title of your comic? It's a bad title. Keep it short. Keep weird spellings out of there as much as you can, because here's the thing. If somebody can't Google your comic, they can't find it and therefore cannot read it. Look up search engine optimization. Maximize your SEO. And then also from me, figure out your elevator pitch. Describe your story in 2 to 3 sentences. Simplicity is key. Basically, the simpler it is for you to describe your story, the better idea you have of what your story's major theme is. Okay? Cool. So now it is time to make your comic. So now it's time to make some pictures. Is your comic going to be traditional, which is hand-drawn on paper and scanned in? Digital, which would be drawn in an art program like Photoshop, Clip Studio, Sai, etc. Is it 3D, which would be modeled and rendered in a 3D program like Maya, Blender, etc.? And also, is it going to be full color? Are you going to do it in black and white? Is it going to be in grayscale like most manga is? How are you going to make it? Experiment with your art and find a style or method that works for you and your story. Highly recommend it. We got into a long conversation during a stream the other day about genres versus art style in comics, and how if you want to make a comic about Kirby, making it in a gritty, like, noir style, high contrast black and white is maybe a bit of a tonal clash. So you want to think about, like, the content of your comic and apply your art style to that. All right. So these are my comic making software recommendations. Clip Studio Paint, I have to scream about. They didn't sponsor this panel, but they did sponsor a giveaway that I'm running on my Instagram right now. and they keep retweeting my posts on Twitter. So shout out to Clip Studio Paint Senpai. So this one's my personal favorite. I've been using it for years. I started using this. The Cast Off has been made in Clip Studio Paint since the start of Chapter 5. I love it. It's great. It is a program specifically designed for illustrations and comics. It is a little bit expensive, but it does go on sale every couple months. So if you're balking at the price, just wait for it to go on sale. Also, I am running a giveaway on Instagram, and I'm going to drop that link in the chat right now. So another option is Photoshop. The problem with Photoshop is that it's expensive and it requires a subscription unless you have an older version of the software, but it basically has everything you need. My thing is, like, if you already have like Creative Cloud for other reasons, you might as well use Photoshop for your comic, but it is not my personal favorite. It's just the one that I have used the most aside from Clip Studio. But there are plenty of other options, including free options. There's Paint Tool Sai, there's GIMP, which I believe is free. Procreate for the iPad is fairly cheap, and I know a lot of folks stand by it. I use it for sketching, but I could totally see it being used for comics. Krita, I believe, is free. Another one I meant to put in here and didn't is Medibang, which I believe is free. There's a lot of free programs out there that you guys can use. My personal recommendation is Clip Studio Paint, though, because they have a lot of cool tools that help expedite the process. So, before you start your comic, experiment. Try drawing pages both traditionally and digitally. Try shading in color, in grayscale, with screen tones, or in flat black and white. Figure out what works for your story and for you. Because that's the thing, right? A full-colored comic is going to take a lot longer than a comic that is only in grayscale. So you kind of have to think about your schedule, you know? You got to think about how much time you want to put into this comic. Like, full color is great, but if it takes you 20 hours to finish a whole full-color comic page, I would highly recommend you figure out something that isn't going to take you as long, you know? You want to save time. You want to make comics. The balance of output to work hours is one that's important to strike when you're working on comics like this, because you don't want to hurt yourself. You don't want to burn out, you know? It's really easy to do if your production takes longer than expected. Also, next point, pick an art method that you enjoy doing and doesn't burn you out. If you hate working in color, why in the heck would you make your webcomic in full color? You know? Pick something that you are going to enjoy doing it, because you are going to be doing a lot of it, you know? Also, one of my recommendations is to time yourself. When you draw, try to make yourself as efficient as possible, because comics are a big time sink. And if you can find a way to knock work hours off of your amount of time, if you can find a way to work faster and smarter, you will thank yourself later, okay? It's weird because I'm used to doing this panel in person, so when I say okay, people will like nod at me. I can't do that right now. I'm just looking at the Twitch chat. Okay. Also, I just stuck this in here. Don't be afraid to use resources to help you work more efficiently. Thank you for the nods in the Twitch chat. I appreciate it. So things like custom brushes, 3D models, reference photos, etc. can be a huge help to speed up the comic making process. That is so much nodding in the chat. We're good, you guys. But yeah, so this is just a screen cap I took off of a Clip Studio Paint tutorial that's on their website about how you can use like 3D models to speed up your comic drawing process. Usually, when I make 3D models, I just use them as a reference to trace over. You can also get like character models that you can use to just kind of like do stuff, figure out like where characters like feet would be in a certain pose. I also like to take a lot of my own reference photos, so I have like a little phone tripod, and I'll just set it up, and I'll just like take pictures of myself doing like weird faces, and that's how I get reference for like a lot of my panels. If I need like a more dynamic pose or something that I can't do while standing in my bedroom, then I will move over to a 3D model and just like pose it the way I want it, take a screen cap, and then use that as a reference while I draw. There is no shame in using resources that will help you comic faster. Anybody who gives you crap about using shortcuts and tools and the technology and assets to make your comics and help make them faster and better, they are not worth your time. Just ignore them. Keep making comics. Prosper. I'm going to take a sip real quick. Oh man, I just looked up at my viewer count and it says 169. Nice! Moving along. All right. This is the most important slide in the PowerPoint. Back up your files! Please, for the love of God, back up your files. Back up your files, I beg you. Save yourself the tears and frustration of losing your work. This is so important, I gave it its own slide. I have a quick story for you guys, a horror story, if you will, that was told to me in my senior year of art school. A story about a man, a student, in his final year of college, who was working on his senior film. He had his entire senior film backed up in 3 places. It was on the school network, it was on a flash drive, and it is like an external hard drive, and he had it on his home computer. In one day, the network at school crashed, and all of his data was lost. His laptop fell out of his backpack on the way home and shattered his computer hard drive. And when he got home, someone had broken into his house and stolen his external hard drive, and he lost over a year of work in under 24 hours. Back up your files. Have I drilled this into your brain? Good. Back up your files. Some more tips from the Spider-Force forums. What's important is that you do the work, not that you do it the quote-unquote right way. If it works for you, then it works. I do a lot of nonsense in the behind the scenes of Cast-Off pages. If you want to see some of my nonsense, I stream art every Wednesday and sometimes on other days. Come watch me and I will teach you my nonsense. Okay, if you have worked on a page for ages and you still think it looks a bit rubbish, just post it. Don't beat yourself up just because you can't get a character's expression quite right. I will break out the 2 cakes expression here, where like you might like make a cake and then look at other people's cakes and be like, oh, those cakes look so much better than mine. My cake isn't worth anything. But you know what the audience sees? They see 2 cakes. And that's awesome. Let them eat cake. Unintentional historical reference, but yeah. Okay. Webcomics are a marathon, not a sprint. So finding a schedule that works with your life is much more important than overworking yourself. Okay? Don't burn yourself out on comics. I'm giving you permission to use shortcuts and make things that work for you. Okay? You don't have to spend 100 hours on every single page. And if you do spend $100 on 100 hours on every page, I will personally come to your house and whack you with a rolled up newspaper. Okay? I've gotten to the point where my workload is so streamlined that I can make a whole page of Cast-Off in like 6 hours. That came from a lot of years of work to get it to that point, but the faster and easier your comic process is, the easier it is and the less likely it is you'll burn yourself out. Okay? Cool. Read other people's works to figure out how to best go about making your own. Learn from others. Teaching yourself in the void is a slow way to talent. Okay? It's okay to use other people as examples, you know? Artists should be good thieves. That does not mean take other people's art and post it on your Twitter without credit. That means see what other people have done, and if you like it, figure out how you can apply that to your own work. Don't be ashamed or afraid to jump around and work on what you're really passionate about. If you don't enjoy what you're doing, the likelihood of burnout is much higher. This is very true. If you are working on a comic that you are not 100% passionate about, you will burn out eventually. My advice for that is to make your webcomic just the most self-indulgent thing you could possibly make. My comic is full of tropes that I love, and because I love those tropes so much, it makes it easy to work on the comic because I get excited about something that happens on every single page, you know? bad boy can fit so many sad magic boys in it. Slaps the roof of the webcomic. Okay, also, these are important. Character design. Design your main characters so that they're fun to draw, because you'll be drawing them a lot. Y'all, I have, like, a fantasy military installation in my webcomic. I gave them shirts and pants because I didn't want to have to draw detailed uniforms every time I had to draw those characters. Make them easy to draw. You will thank yourself later. Also, make sure that your cast has different silhouettes and color schemes, otherwise your readers will keep confusing them. I try to, like, give each of my characters just kind of a color that's theirs, but also if you draw them in a lineup and any of the characters look too similar to each other, someone that reads it is going to get confused. Okay, so try and make your cast as visually distinct from each other as possible. Try not to fall into the remake loop. Too many stories just stop because the artist feels the need to go back and redo older pages. You improve over time, that's normal and good. Don't go back and remake old pages. It's not worth it. Just keep going. Let your old art be as it was, because that was a time in your life. That was an art style that you chose, and you were proud of it when you first made it. You know? So don't disrespect your older self, your past self. Keep moving forward and just keep improving what you're currently outputting. The one exception to this is if you're going to go back and, like, print it, you can go back and, like, brush some of the dust off of it. But do not, like, completely redraw your old comic. It's not worth it. Don't do it. Also, for me again, if you're working digitally, memorize your keyboard shortcuts, because they will literally save you hours of time. Hours of time spent digging through menus will be a thing of the past if you can figure out your keyboard shortcuts for things that you do frequently. Some more tips. I'm gonna take a sip real quick. Talking too much. It's making me thirsty. So, some more tips, just in general. Find friends to be your beta testers. Tell them about the story, show them your scripts, and let them see pages in advance. They may catch plot holes or inconsistencies that you didn't notice because you, as the creator, are too close to it. And so sometimes, like a question, like you know the answer to, you don't even think about potential plot holes, but your audience members will see them immediately, and then you'll be stuck floundering around. So it's a good idea to show people your scripts ahead of time, like get a trusted group of friends. I call mine my spoiler squad. Just a group of friends who, like, know everything about my comic, and I will, like, show them scripts and be like, hey, does this make sense? Does this work? Does this character's motivation work for you? Highly recommend that. Also, step away. Take some time between steps of comic making to stare at something else, then come back to your work with a fresh pair of eyes. Fix anything that doesn't look right before continuing. I never ink and color my comic pages on the same day that I sketch them. Never. That is a point that I make, because you know what happens when you sketch something and then you immediately jump into inking it without taking a break to, like, refresh your brain? You draw characters with 2 left feet. I have done that so many times, it's embarrassing. So just, like, take breaks, take a chance to, like, look away at something else, come back to your work on a regular basis with a fresh set of eyes. And you'll see stuff that you didn't notice before because you were too close to it. Also, yeah, take a break. Making comics is fun, but remember to stretch frequently and take care of your precious hands, because carpal tunnel sucks butt. Okay? I remember day 1, I walked into my very first comics class at school, and they were like, hi, welcome to Comics 101. I'm going to show you guys extremely graphic pictures of carpal tunnel syndrome. So, to scare us into taking care of ourselves. It worked! It worked really well. Okay. So, a quick note on collaboration. This is not something I can answer too many questions on because I've never done it personally, but if you love drawing but aren't so good at writing, or if you're great at writing but suck at drawing, you should consider collaborating with another artist or a writer. Make sure that you choose your collaboration partners carefully. Collaborate with someone you can trust to get the work done, not just because you're friends. If you just, like, try and do a comic with your best friend, they might be less passionate about it than you are. And they say, yeah, sure, I'll draw your comic, but then you get the whole thing scripted and you pass it off to them and they just never make it. Make sure that you find somebody who you can trust to work on this comic, not just somebody who you want to work with because they're your best friend or whatever. Also, you should write a contract before starting the comic. It doesn't have to be you don't have to get lawyers involved. Just hash out the basics of what is going to happen when you guys get money involved with this. Like, who's responsible for what? How are you guys going to share profits if you ever make any? This is very important because if you don't do this, you might find yourself in some legal trouble later down the line when your artist is trying to sue you for more money. Also, one last note. Writers, do not expect artists to draw your comic for free. Artists do not work for free. Okay? I feel like this is simple and I'm not going to elaborate on it too much. Your time and effort is worth money. Do not insult me by asking me to draw your fantasy comic for free. I have pets to feed, and I will just ignore your email. Moving along. Here are some additional comic resources that I highly recommend. First are 2 books. I own both of these. They are fantastic. If you guys want to learn more about the actual craft of making comics and like paneling and all this other stuff, Making Comics by Scott McCloud is the comic maker's Bible, basically. This was a textbook at the school I went to. It is how to draw comics written as a comic. So it's very easy to read and has like visual examples that you can follow along with. If you want to learn more about the craft of making comics, read this freaking book, okay? Also, Save the Cat, one of my favorite freaking books. It is a book specifically about writing for screenplays, but the information that they give you in that book on storytelling and how to write a story and how to work a narrative are valuable for any kind of storytelling. So like, it's mostly for film, but the advice in there has helped me exponentially with writing stuff for comics as well. It applies to everything because storytelling is storytelling no matter what medium you're making it with. Also, some additional websites. I haven't checked on Webcomic chat in a while, but I know that it was fairly active a few years ago. There's a Twitter chat room. They stopped doing the Twitter chat room, but the webcomicchat.com has old archives. Webcomic Alliance has a lot of articles about writing and drawing comics. And then I know I sassed you guys a little bit for hoarding Pinterest tutorials, but there's no shame as long as you hoard tutorials so that you can actually use them for making comics, you know? If you find a tutorial, use it. And if you're stuck on how to do something, Google a tutorial. You will find something. Someone has made them, you know? Also, forums. The Spider Forest forums. This is, again, I'm mentioning them again. This is the comic collective I am a member of. The forums, you can ask questions in there, and there are a lot of archived threads about, like, different processes. You can also get constructive criticism and things like that. Tapas and Comic Fury also have their own forums related to webcomics and the work that goes into them. I don't post there, really, but I skulk through stuff occasionally. Goodreads, all of it. Where is my... Okay, go down. Okay, so now it's time to talk about posting your comic. So once you've made your comic, in order for it to be a web comic, you gotta stick it on the web somewhere. But where are you gonna stick it? You can build your own website, or you can host it on a free comic hosting website. Building and hosting your own website is going to be more time-consuming, and it is going to cost money for things like hosting, or if you're like me, it's going to cost you money to convince a friend to build your comic website for you. But you get full control over how it looks and the setup and all like the extra features you want to add, and you aren't constrained to platform limitations. Free webcomic hosts are free, they don't cost anything to post your comic on, and they do come with built-in audiences of people who like to read comics, but they aren't as customizable as a webcomic site you built yourself. So you should decide what is best for you. So these are some comic hosting websites. This is not an exhaustive list. These are just the ones that I know about. Webtoon, I feel like, is kind of the big shot right now, to the point where I get people asking me what my webtoon is called. And I'm like, just because I post it on Webtoons doesn't make it a webtoon. It's not a webtoon comic. It's a star comic. I post it on Webtoon because people like to read it there. But if I one day decided that I hate Webtoon, I could just yank it off there, but the comic would continue to exist off of Webtoon. Sorry, I'm letting my aggravations get to me. Webtoon and Tapas, I think, are like kind of the big two. Comic Fury is also valuable. Comic Fury, I believe, lets you kind of like customize your site a lot more. There's also Tumblr, which is okay. Tumblr is very good for like one-off comics that people can relate to and are memeable, and that people can reblog if they think it's funny. DeviantArt is where I hosted my first ever webcomic. I don't necessarily recommend it now, but if you have literally no other option, you can put it there. You can put it there. I'm gonna take a drink real fast. How we doing so far, everybody? You keeping up? We good? Okay, so DeviantArt exists. It does, it's true. Okay, so if you're going to be making your own website, these are some features of comic websites that you should put in your website. An about page. This is a brief synopsis, when the comic updates, so your update schedule, creator blurb, etc. Give people information. Also, if you're going to be making a comic that would require anything like content warnings, or like a rating, you can put it on your about page and people will go there to look for it. Also, you need an archive page, because if let's say, for example, you have a 500 plus page fantasy adventure webcomic, cast-off-comic.com, people might not be able to read the whole thing in one sitting. And so when they come back to it, you want to make sure that they can find where they left off quickly and easily. And that is why I have thumbnails of all my comic pages in my archive, so people can be like, I don't remember which page number I left off on, but I remember what it looked like, and they can just scroll through the archive, find where they left off, and keep going. The easier it is to navigate your archive, the less likely it is that people are going to stop reading because they're annoyed with it. A characters page with pictures and character descriptions. This is useful for your readers to keep track of who's who. Navigation both above and below every comic page. I recommend sticking it above as well as below, so that, say, Joe hasn't checked the Cast-Off website in a couple weeks and he doesn't want spoilers, but he only needs to go back like 2 or 3 pages. He can just like hit the little arrows at the top and doesn't have to scroll past spoilers to get to where he last left off. Get it? So navigation both above and below. Also, comment section. This is optional, but I highly recommend it so that you can communicate with your readers and your readers can communicate with you. I know a lot of folks who have like really, really huge audiences sometimes don't like to have comment sections because it becomes too much to moderate if there's too many people talking. But when you're first starting out, definitely have a comment section so that you can talk to your readers and make jokes with them. And in my case, just let them post memes. You know, it's fun. Also, a links page with links to other webcomics that you like. You should spread the love and help other people find other comics. I've had several people who found my comic because Cast-Off was in their links page. So you can like tell people what your favorite comics are and help kind of spread the love. I'll just go ahead and get this out of the way. People finding other comics to read is not going to make them like you less. Okay? People can enjoy more than one webcomic. So spreading the love and helping comics find new readers is only beneficial. Okay? Don't be a snooty stick up your butt and not support other comic artists. Okay? Yeah, 2 cakes. 2 cakes. Okay? I have a links page on Cast-Off's website that I need to update it, frankly, but just like, if you help other readers find your favorite comics, then they might even help advertise you as well. It's a mutually beneficial partnership that's just kind of casual and throwing little hearts all over the stage. Yay. Spread the love. Be cool. Don't be an exclusive butt, okay? Also, if you have social media, make your social media page or links really easy to find. Because my thing is, if I find an artist who makes a webcomic that I really like, I want to know what they're talking about. I want to see if they post like non-comic art sometimes. And if I can't find your Twitter feed, if I don't know what your Twitter username is, I'm gonna get sad. The easier it is to find, the more likely it will be that people can find you. Yay. Also, an RSS feed for your comic, because people still use RSS feeds. They are very valuable, and most webcomic like CMSs, that's content management system, most comic websites will come with one of these automatically, but if it doesn't, you gotta make sure you want one, because a lot of people keep track of comics with these things. They're extremely handy. I personally don't use them, but I know a lot of people who do. Tips. If you can, launch your comic with the entire first chapter or at least a large chunk of pages. Give people something to sink your teeth into, and they'll be more likely to stick around. Okay? Also, if you make some pages before you commit to publishing them, it'll take some of the pressure off, and it can give you an idea of how fast you work and how often you can update. Okay? So I'll give you guys an example. Imagine that you go to a webcomic. It's a brand new webcomic. It's called Kittens in Space. You go to the website for Kittens in Space, and you read, they've just started. They just posted their webcomic. They're hyping it up on social media, and you go to their website, and they have one page. They have a single page of this comic. That's not a lot. That's not nearly enough to get invested in the character, in a story, anything like that. However, you go to another comic that has just started. It just began. Like, today. Today is the day that dogs go under the ocean. Dogs go into the Mariana Trench, a new hit webcomic, and you go there, and they already have like the entire first chapter. You're gonna spend some time like reading that entire first chapter. That's gonna like set up the story, and you know what it's about, and you like get a chance. Yeah, you get a chance to like figure out your workflow, and it gives people a chance to get more invested in your comic. Because if you think about it, realistically, you've got one chance to grab a stranger's attention. Make it count. Okay? Also, don't expect your comic to be super popular right away. It'll take a few years to build an audience, and people generally won't get invested until you're around 100 pages in. This is referred to sometimes as the 100-page rule. Also, I mentioned this before, but comics that start with a large audience probably have an artist who is already popular and just directed their audience to their comic. So don't knock on people whose comics get popular immediately, okay? Because they worked for that audience. You gotta work for your audience too. Moving on. I'm gonna take a sip of my water real fast. Okay. Next is establishing your update schedule and stick to it. Because let me run you guys through a very real scenario. How many of you guys have been reading a comic that suddenly, just without warning, drops off the face of the earth? Or a comic that updates at least a few times a month, but you never know when it updates. And you never know when to check the website for new panels, for new updates, for new pages. It's a pain. So you as a webcomic artist and a creator should make it as easy as possible for people to know when your comic updates. Okay, so that people know when and where to go to your website. Pick a regular schedule that works for you and stick to it. You should let people know when you update. Typically, webcomics will post their update schedule at the top of the page near the logo, so it's very easy to see. The first thing people see when you come into your comic website should be, hey, new pages are posted every Wednesday. Okay? Make it easy. Most comics update once a week or more, If you update less than that, you risk losing your readers. So you should try to give them something to look forward to every week and be consistent. Now, obviously, this can change. If you could do just like a big batch of pages every month, or you could update with a handful of pages every 2 weeks. But generally, you want to have at least 1 page per week. That's usually a good pace. That's normal for webcomics. Also, I highly recommend always being a few pages or updates ahead. So this is called a buffer or a queue. Having pages done beforehand is less stressful than scrambling to finish a page a few hours before it goes online. For example, I always try to be about a month ahead of what the comics pages I am posting, because if I happen to like finish a page, but then I notice a problem with it, I've got a month to fix it. Whereas my first webcomic, I just posted the page immediately, and if I made any mistakes, people have already seen it, and then it's embarrassing. Okay, so I've said this before, and I'll say it again. Webcomics are a marathon, not a sprint. Don't burn yourself out, okay? Don't overdo it. My advice is, before you actually commit to posting your comic online, okay, before you actually start, you should take a week and just don't push it, but just like make as much of your comic as you can in 1 week with your normal amount of free time. Then at the end of that week, look at how much you have accomplished. Like, so say you made 3 pages in that week. Subtract 1, and that's how many updates you should post a week. You should never be working at maximum output, okay? Because that's a fast and easy way to burn out. You should always give yourself a little bit of wiggle room with your pages, okay? So for example, if I sit down and if I buckle myself in and I go, I could make 4 pages of Cast Off a week. I do 2 pages a week, because that way I still have time to enjoy myself and exist as a human outside of my webcomic, you know? Also, if you have to miss an update, let your readers know and provide a comeback date if you can, because if you just drop off the face of nowhere, your audience is gonna get upset with you. Your readers will appreciate honesty. Be open with them. Don't leave them in the dark wondering when the next update will be. A lot of you folks said yes when I said, has it ever happened that a comic just disappeared? You know how it feels. Don't do it to other people. This applies to missing single updates or going on a longer hiatus for any reason. Whenever I have to go on hiatus, I like to give people like as big of a warning as I possibly can, so that people know it's coming and they can brace themselves for it, and then it's not a surprise when it happens. Okay? More tips! Most of this PowerPoint is just tips, and me just talking like, hey! Bullet points! Okay, so, be your own biggest fan. This kind of ties into the motivation topic, but comics are a slog. Comics are hard. Relying on others to encourage you and get you to like motivate you to work on your comic can be a fast track to losing motivation. So you should learn to rely on your own self-gratification and make your comic something that makes you happy enough that you enjoy working on it so much that you can reliably do it every single week. Also, save nice comments. Whenever you get a positive comment about your work, take a screen cap of it and put it in a folder that's easy to get to on your computer. I put mine on my desktop. I've got a folder on my desktop that's called This Folder Gives Me Life, and it's just full of every single nice comment about my comic that I have literally ever gotten. And on the sad days when I feel like crap and I feel like no one likes my comic and I feel like an imposter, I have like a whole folder filled with happy vibes that I can look through, and it makes me feel good. And yeah, this applies to any creative work, not just comics. Also, don't compare yourself to others, because I know this is a thing that a lot of artists struggle with, artists and creative types in general. Your webcomic journey is yours and yours alone. Don't let the successes of others tarnish your drive to succeed. Okay? You are a valuable creative. The stuff you make, nobody else can make. Your journey is yours alone, so you should share it as much as you can. Okay? Cool. Congratulations! You are now armed with the knowledge you need to start your own webcomic. Go forth, friends, and make comics. So, this is kind of the first half of questions. I'm gonna stop and take a drink real quick. I won't be able to get to everybody's because there's so many. So many people. 182 is what my viewer count says right now. That's terrifying. Okay, but if you guys have any questions, I will answer questions for the next 5 minutes. And we will have more time at the end, but I do have my second half after this, which is more on promotion, and I will take more questions after that. Okay? So first one I see is any advice on blocking out comic strips. I highly recommend just like looking at screen design. Because screen design can kind of like tell you it's the value of where things are on the page and how much space they take up for. Okay? Oh lord, there's a lot of questions. I can't focus on all of them. But yeah, I would say look at other comics and see how they lay their stuff out and just kind of like try and recreate it a little bit. Just like really sketchy, try and recreate comic pages that you like. And see what works and what doesn't, and kind of like see if you can figure out how to make it work. It's hard to talk about this kind of thing without having an example in front of me. How do I make money on my comics? That's going to be the next half of this presentation, so I will get back to that. When did you start making webcomics? A long ass time ago. I started in like 2005, but I didn't start posting them online until 2007 because that's when I got my first DeviantArt account. Are you a full-time comic artist? I'm a full-time artist. My comic pays my rent. How do I manage backgrounds? Keep them simple. Do like one big establishing shot every time you change to a new page, or like every time your characters enter a new scene. And try to just keep it simple. You don't have to put a super detailed background in every single panel, you know? So I would say spend a lot of time on like one really detailed background to get your audience grounded within the scene. And then after that, you can go pretty simple on the rest. As long as your viewers have a good idea of where your characters are, you don't need to draw a background for every single panel. Okay. How long should a beginner comic be before you start making your dream comic? So what I recommend is that if it is your first time making comics at all, there's a couple different avenues you can go down. I got my start making comics by making like silly little fan art comic strips for video games that I liked. I also made like jokey strips about things that my friends said in the style of like Calvin and Hobbes and 4-Koma manga comics. But as far as like if you've got like a fantasy story or like a longer graphic novel story you want to tell, I would say like pick a character that you like and just like write what a day in their life is like, or write like a short comic about like their experience doing something. Just make something simple. I would say keep it like under like 10 pages or fewer for your very first time. And then you can work to like kind of larger things after that. I'm going to answer questions about social media in the second half, so we will get to that. If I suck at writing and drawing, then practice. Stop sucking. Okay, but like serious answer though. This is something I was talking about in a TikTok live the other day. One of my old professors at school said that inside of you are 100 shitty bicycles. And I will explain what that means. So imagine that you've never drawn a bicycle before, but you want to be able to draw bicycles better. Inside of you are 100 shitty bicycle drawings. And underneath those shitty bicycle drawings are good bicycle drawings. My phone just went off and I don't know where it is. So if you want to get better at drawing bicycles, you gotta get those shitty bicycle drawings out of your system. You draw 100 of anything, and you're gonna get better at drawing it, combined with references and studying. You look at a bicycle, you work on the bicycle, and slowly you will work those shitty bicycles out of your system. If you want to get better at anything, you have to practice. You have to do the thing, okay? If you want to get better at drawing, you have to draw. No excuses. You just have to do it, okay? If you want to get better at writing, you have to write things. You will not get better at doing anything by avoiding it. Okay? If you want to get good at something, you just have to kick your own ass and sit down and do it. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little bit crass in the Q&A section, but it's true. You will not get better at anything by avoiding it. Okay? I'll take like 1 or 2 more questions, and then I gotta go take a break and rest my throat for a hot minute. Would you recommend getting a drawing tablet with a screen rather than a screenless one if you want to start making comics? Yes, absolutely. My first like 10 years of being a digital artist, I had a non-screen tablet that just like sat on my desk like a fancy mouse pad. I loved it, I used it, but the screen tablet is such an improvement. It makes things so much easier. So if you can afford a screen tablet, I would highly recommend springing for one of those if you're taking this seriously. Okay, so I will have time for more questions after the second half of the panel. But I'm going to take like 5 minutes and just like rest my throat for a little bit. For reference, here's my comic. I will go ahead and put those links in the chat. The stream is not over yet. I am going to do the second half after this. I'm going to take 5 minutes and then to just like rest my voice, refill my water. And when we get back, I'm going to start the second half, which is Webcomics 102, from self-promotion to self-publishing. All right? So, if you want to stick around, find out how to promote yourself and do all that jazz, stick around for that. I'm going to take 5 minutes and go stretch and get some water. Don't go anywhere. I am going to activate my starting soon screen. I'm going to disappear. I'm going to deactivate the mic, and I will see you guys in 5 minutes.